celebrated closing his billion-dollar deal. He never knew she was carrying his baby, never knew she had cancer, never knew she'd tried to tell him 3 times and he'd sent her a text saying, "Not now." 16 years later, Karma walked through the door of his oncology room wearing a white coat with her name on it. Dr. Lawrence Carter, the woman he ghosted when she was dying, the mother of the son he never met. And now, she's the only doctor who can save his life. Some women wait for apologies. Others become the people holding your fate in their hands. The mansion was silent the night Lawrence Carter packed her life into a duffel bag. Not peaceful silent, hollow silent. The kind that presses against your chest and makes you realize how alone you've been all along, even when you thought you were building something with someone. She moved through the guest suite, her suite, though it never really felt like hers, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Her phone sat face down on the dresser, screen dark, Ronald's last text still glowing behind her closed eyes. "Can't talk now. Merger's at a critical point. We'll sort everything out after, okay? Promise." 6 hours ago. Before the biopsy results, before the word malignant became the loudest sound in her universe. Before she realized that when you tell the man you love, you need him, and he tells you to wait, you learn exactly where you stand. Lawrence folded a sweater, his favorite, on her, navy cashmere, that made her eyes look darker, and felt something crack inside her chest that had nothing to do with the lymph nodes the doctor had circled on her scan. She'd practiced the words 100 times. Tell him about the pregnancy first. Let him process that joy. Then deliver the cancer diagnosis. But joy requires presence. And Ronald Hudson was 47 floors above Manhattan right now, shaking hands in $1,000 suits, building his empire one acquisition at a time. She wasn't even a footnote in his calendar. But here's what Lawrence didn't know yet, what she couldn't possibly know in that moment. The decision she was about to make, walking out that door, it would set in motion a chain of events that wouldn't resolve for 16 years. And when it did, the man she was leaving behind would be fighting for his life in ways he never imagined. The pregnancy test sat in her purse, 2 pink lines that should have changed everything. Next to it, folded into thirds, the pathology report, stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma. Treatable, doctor, Chen had said. Survivable, he'd promised. If she started treatment immediately. If she had support. If she wasn't doing this completely alone. Lawrence caught her reflection in the mirror above the dresser. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy knot. The slight swell of her lower belly she'd noticed yesterday morning, 13 weeks along. 3 months of carrying Ronald's child while he canceled dinners, missed calls, rescheduled conversations that kept getting pushed further into a future that might not exist for her. She'd met him 2 years ago at a Hudson Innovations charity gala, back when she was a medical intern drowning in student debt and research hours. He'd been magnetic, intense gray eyes, confidence that filled a room, a laugh that made her believe she was the only person worth his attention. "You're different," he'd told her that night, hand warm against the small of her back. "Everyone here wants something from me. You just want to talk about stem cell research and whether the universe has a moral arc." She'd fallen so hard, so fast. He'd offered her a research grant, then temporary housing during her internship, just until you finish your residency applications. His mansion felt like a fairy tale. Morning coffee in a kitchen bigger than her childhood home. Nights curled in his study while he worked and she read journals, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze hers. She thought they were building something real. She didn't realize she was just convenient. The first missed dinner should have told her. Then, the canceled weekend. Then the 3-week stretch where they lived in the same house but barely spoke because his schedule was insane right now. "Lawrence, you understand." She'd understood. That's what women do. They understand. They accommodate. They wait. Until waiting becomes the only thing they're good at. Lawrence zipped the duffel bag closed. 26 years of life reduced to clothes, toiletries, the few books she couldn't leave behind. Everything else, the future she'd imagined, the partnership she'd believed in, the love she'd given freely stayed behind in this cold, perfect mansion. Her phone buzzed. Ronald's assistant. "Mr. Hudson will be in meetings until 11 p.m. He said he'll call you after?" Lawrence's vision blurred. She typed back with shaking thumbs. "Don't bother. Tell him I hope the merger goes well." She didn't leave a note. What could she possibly say that he'd actually take the time to read? Some men don't deserve explanations. Some men only learn about consequences when it's too late to fix them. Lawrence walked through the mansion one last time, past the dining room where they'd never eaten, through the living room with furniture too expensive to sit on, down the marble staircase that echoed with every step. She pulled open the heavy oak front door. Manhattan air hit her face cold, indifferent, alive with the sound of traffic and distant sirens and millions of people who had no idea her life was ending. The Uber pulled up 60 seconds later. The driver, an older woman with kind eyes, helped her load the bag. "Big move?" she asked gently. Lawrence slid into the back seat, hand instinctively moving to her belly, protecting what Ronald would never know existed. "The biggest," Lawrence whispered. She didn't look back as they pulled away. If she looked back, she might convince herself to stay, to wait one more day, to give him one more chance to choose her. But Lawrence Carter was done waiting. The cancer wouldn't wait. The baby wouldn't wait. And she was finally learning that her life, however long she had left, was too precious to spend begging someone to show up. The hospital waiting room at 9 p.m. smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Lawrence filled out intake forms with trembling hands, checking boxes about medical history, emergency contacts, insurance she barely had. The fluorescent lights made everyone look half dead. Lawrence Carter? A nurse appeared, clipboard in hand, face professionally neutral in that way, medical staff perfect when they see too much suffering. Lawrence stood on unsteady legs. "Dr. Chen is ready for you. We'll start mapping your treatment protocol tonight." Treatment. Protocol. Clinical words for the war her body was about to wage against itself. She followed the nurse down sterile hallways, past rooms where other patients fought invisible battles, toward a future she'd face alone. Her phone buzzed again in her purse. She didn't check it. Ronald Hudson was probably still in his meeting, still building his empire, still completely unaware that the woman who loved him most had just walked out carrying two secrets that would define them both. But people like Ronald don't think about consequences. Not until consequences show up years later, wearing a white coat, holding a chart with their name on it, asking them to explain why they're losing weight and can't catch their breath. Not until the universe decides it's time to teach them what powerlessness feels like. What Ronald didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that karma was already writing their next chapter. And some debts, they take years to come due. The first round of chemotherapy hit Lawrence like a freight train, made of nausea and bone-deep exhaustion. She sat in the infusion center at Mount Sinai, IV dripping poison into her veins. Poison designed to kill the cancer before it killed her and the baby. The chair was institutional green, cracked vinyl that stuck to her thighs. Around her, other patients dozed or scrolled phones, or stared at daytime television with glazed eyes. Lawrence pressed her hand against her belly, 16 weeks now. The oncology team had been brutally honest. Continuing the pregnancy during treatment was risky. Terminating would allow more aggressive therapy. "I'm keeping my baby," she'd told Dr. Chen, voice steady even as her world crumbled. "Whatever we need to do, we work around that." He'd nodded slowly, already calculating modified protocols, adjusted dosages, acceptable risks. Acceptable, as if any of this was acceptable. Her mother arrived 20 minutes into the infusion, Margaret Carter, a woman who'd raised 3 daughters on a teacher's salary and had opinions about everything. "You should have called me sooner," Margaret said, pulling a chair close, face tight with worry. "Living in that man's mansion, playing house." "Mom, please, not now." Margaret's expression softened. She reached over, squeezed Lawrence's hand, rough palm, warm, real. "Okay, baby, not now." A pause. "But when you're better, we're talking about that man who got you pregnant and didn't even. He doesn't know. And he's never going to. Because what would be the point?" Ronald Hudson lived in a different universe, one where problems got solved with phone calls and wire transfers. He didn't know how to show up for the messy, impossible, unglamorous work of actually loving someone. The weeks blurred together, chemo sessions that left her vomiting into hospital toilets, nights where she couldn't tell if the cramping was treatment or pregnancy complications, mornings where she woke surprised to still be alive. Margaret moved into Lawrence's tiny queen studio, sleeping on an air mattress, making bland foods Lawrence could sometimes keep down, holding her hair back when she couldn't. "You're stronger than you know," Margaret whispered one night. Lawrence didn't feel strong. She felt like she was disappearing, cell by cell, into an abyss that might swallow her completely. But somewhere in the wreckage of her body, her son was growing. Wilder James Carter was born on a Tuesday morning in April, 6 weeks premature, weighing 4 pounds, 3 ounces. Lawrence held him for the first time in the NICU, tubes and wires monitoring his tiny body, and saw Ronald Hudson staring back at her through infant eyes, the same steel gray, the same intensity, the same silent demand to be seen. "Hey, baby boy," she whispered, tears streaming. "I'm your mom, and I'm going to make sure you have everything I didn't." The nurses let her stay 2 hours before exhaustion forced her back to recovery. But she returned every day, pressing hands against the isolette, talking to him about everything and nothing, promising him a future she wasn't sure she'd live to see. 3 weeks later, Wilder came home. 3 months later, Lawrence finished chemotherapy. 6 months later, her scans came back clear. She'd survived. But survival was just the beginning. Medical school, while raising an infant, should have been impossible. Lawrence did it anyway. She studied while Wilder napped, memorized anatomy while he played on a blanket beside her desk, took him to her mother's before early morning rotations. Money was suffocating, student loans piled on medical bills her insurance barely covered. She worked nights as a medical transcriptionist, lived on rice and beans, and pharmaceutical rep samples. Some nights, she'd stand over Wilder's crib, watching him sleep, wondering if Ronald ever thought about her, if he'd tried to find her, if he regretted not showing up. Then she'd remember the unanswered text, the silence that followed, the life he chose over her. And she'd close that door in her heart one more time. Wilder grew. Walked at 11 months, talked at 18 months, asked questions at 2 that most kids didn't think about until 5. He had his father's intelligence, his intensity, his focus. But he had his mother's heart, stubborn, fierce, capable of loving deeply after being broken. "Who's my daddy?" Wilder asked one morning when he was 4, out of nowhere, while Lawrence made eggs before her shift. Lawrence froze. She'd prepared for this question. "Your daddy is someone I loved very much," she said carefully, kneeling to his level. "But he wasn't ready to be a father. So it's just you and me, buddy." Wilder considered this with the seriousness of a child who understood more than he should. "We are great," he agreed. "But Mom? When I'm a daddy someday, I'm gonna be ready." Lawrence pulled him close, breathing in his shampoo smell, blinking back tears. "I know you will, baby. I know you will." Years, stacked on years. Residency, fellowship, board certifications. Lawrence became Dr. Carter, then Dr. Lawrence Carter, oncologist, then Dr. Lawrence Carter, lymphoma specialist at St. Augustine Medical Center. She became the doctor she needed when she was 26 and terrified and alone. She showed up for her patients, sat with them during bad news, held hands through treatment, celebrated clear scans like they were her own victories, because they were. Every patient she saved felt like proof that surviving her nightmare hadn't been for nothing. Wilder grew into a teenager who was brilliant and kind and just cynical enough about absent fathers to ask pointed questions Lawrence sometimes couldn't answer. He knew his father's name she'd told him at 12, believing honesty beat mystery. He'd looked Ronald Hudson up online, seen the Forbes articles, the mansion photos, the interview where Ronald talked about prioritizing what matters. He prioritized himself, Wilder had said flatly, closing the laptop. Lawrence didn't disagree. While Lawrence built herself from ruins, Ronald Hudson built an empire from ambition. Hudson Innovations went public 3 years after Lawrence disappeared, making Ronald a billionaire before 40. The company expanded AI development, medical technology, sustainable energy. His name appeared on buildings, in headlines, on lists of the world's most powerful. His penthouse stretched across 2 floors of a building he owned in Midtown, floor-to-ceiling windows, art costing more than most people earned in lifetimes, a kitchen he never cooked in, a master suite where he slept alone. Success tasted like champagne and felt like nothing. He dated occasionally beautiful, accomplished women who understood his work came first, who didn't ask for more than he'd give. None lasted, none were Lawrence. He'd tried to find her, hired investigators, searched social media, called old foundation contacts. She'd vanished completely, no forwarding address, no paper trail, no trace. The guilt crept in during quiet moments. Board meetings where he should have focused, but found himself wondering where she was. Charity galas, where he scanned crowds, hoping to see her face. Nights where he'd draft texts he'd never send, because he didn't have her number anymore. "I'm sorry I didn't show up. I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I chose work over you." But sorry doesn't rewrite history. His assistant once asked him 10 years after Lawrence left why he never settled down. "I already met the right person," Ronald had said quietly, staring out his office window. "I just wasn't the right person for her." She never asked again. Ronald turned 53 on a Wednesday in September. His team threw a party at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, important people saying important things, everyone pretending the champagne mattered. Ronald left early, citing fatigue. That word fatigue had been showing up more frequently. He'd mentioned it to his physician, Dr. Morrison, during his last physical. "Probably stress," Morrison had said confidently. "You work 100 hours a week. Your body's telling you to slow down." Ronald had nodded, accepted better sleep aids, moved on. But the exhaustion didn't move on. It settled into his bones like a permanent resident. He'd catch himself winded after climbing one flight of stairs. His appetite disappeared. He lost 8 pounds in 6 weeks. One October morning, he woke drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to catch his breath. The panic lasted 30 seconds before his rational mind kicked in. Stress, overwork, nothing serious. But deep in his chest, underneath logic and denial, something whispered a truth Ronald wasn't ready to hear. Something was very, very wrong. The collapse happened at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday. Ronald woke to his alarm glowing red in darkness, but something was wrong. His chest felt like someone had parked a car on it. His breath came in shallow gasps that didn't reach his lungs. Sweat soaked his sheets, skin cold, despite heat radiating from somewhere deep inside. He tried to sit up. The room tilted violently. His vision grayed at the edges, sounds becoming distant, like he was underwater. He reached for his phone, hand shaking, fingers not cooperating, and managed to unlock it before everything went dark. The 911 operator's voice pulled him back. "Sir, can you hear me? What's your emergency?" Ronald's mouth moved, but produced no sound. His phone had fallen onto the pillow, speaker on, a stranger asking questions he couldn't answer. "I'm sending paramedics now. Stay on the line." He tried to speak, but his body had stopped taking orders. This was new, terrifying. Ronald Hudson, who controlled boardrooms and moved billions, couldn't control his own lungs. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes later, breaking down his penthouse door. They found him conscious, but struggling, vitals concerning enough they didn't waste time with questions. "Possible cardiac event," one said into his radio. "Male, early 50s. Severe respiratory distress, night sweats, unexplained weight loss." The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and fluorescent lights and hands checking pulse, inserting IVs, asking him to rate pain. Ronald wanted to say this wasn't pain, this was terror. The ER at 3 a.m. was controlled chaos, nurses moving efficiently, monitors beeping, antiseptic mixing with something sharper, more human. They wheeled Ronald into a bay, pulled a curtain, and a tired resident began intake. "Mr. Hudson, I'm Dr. Patel. Tell me what happened." Ronald explained the fatigue, weight loss, night sweats, tonight's episode. Dr. Patel listened, face neutral, then ordered what felt like every test known to medicine. Blood work, chest x-ray, CT scan. "We're looking at a few possibilities," Dr. Patel said carefully. "Your symptoms could indicate several conditions. We need imaging to narrow it down." Translation: they had no idea, but something was definitely wrong. Nurse Smith, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and zero tolerance for nonsense, saw the scan results first. Ronald watched her face change, watched her step away, and quietly request Dr. Patel join her. They spoke in hushed tones medical professionals use when they're looking at something concerning. Finally, Dr. Patel returned, pulling up a stool. "Mr. Hudson, your CT shows enlarged lymph nodes in several areas. Combined with your symptoms, we're looking at suspected lymphoproliferative disorder, most likely lymphoma." The words landed like bullets. Lymphoma. Cancer. "We need to transfer you to oncology for further evaluation and biopsy confirmation," Dr. Patel continued. "They'll start diagnostic protocol this morning." Ronald heard himself ask questions, prognosis, treatment, timeline, but his voice sounded like someone else's. someone scared, someone mortal. Someone who'd just learned money and power meant nothing when your cells turned traitor. They moved him to oncology at 7 a.m. The ward was quieter than the ER, but heavier. Everyone here was fighting invisible battles. Ronald was assigned a private corner suite and told his attending oncologist would be in shortly. He sat on the hospital bed in a gown that didn't close properly, feeling more exposed than he'd felt in 30 years. His phone had 17 missed calls, assistant, board members, investors who'd noticed his absence. He ignored all of them. What was he supposed to say? Sorry, can't make the presentation, my body's trying to kill me? A knock at the door. Mr. Hudson, your oncologist is here. Ronald looked up as the door opened, and time stopped. Lawrence Carter stood in the doorway holding a tablet, wearing a white coat with her name embroidered on the chest, hair pulled back, showing the elegant line of her neck. She looked older, not diminished, but stronger, more certain, beautiful in that quiet, devastating way that came from surviving things that should have broken her. Her eyes met his. For one heartbeat, two, Lawrence's professional mask slipped. Ronald saw shock flash across her face, followed by something harder to name. Pain? Anger? The ghost of what they used to be? Then the mask returned, smooth and impenetrable. Dr. Carter? Ronald's voice cracked. He couldn't breathe, and this time it had nothing to do with his symptoms. Lawrence stepped into the room, door closing with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Mr. Hudson. Her voice was arctic, professional. The voice of someone who'd learned to armor herself against men who didn't deserve her warmth. Let's begin. She pulled up a chair not close, maintaining careful distance, and opened his file. Her hands were steady, her expression gave nothing away. Ronald felt like he was drowning. Lawrence, he started. It's Dr. Carter, she corrected, eyes not leaving the screen. I'm here to discuss your diagnosis and treatment options. Your CT shows widespread lymphadenopathy, consistent with suspected Hodgkin's lymphoma. We'll need tissue biopsy for confirmation, staging scans, baseline labs, before we establish treatment protocol. She might as well have been reading a phone book. Ronald's chest tightened. Please, can we talk for a minute? About your medical condition? Absolutely. Lawrence finally looked at him, and the coldness in her eyes was worse than hatred. It was indifference. About anything else? No. Lawrence, I looked for you. After you left, I tried to find you. I wanted to explain. Mr. Hudson. She cut him off, voice sharp as a scalpel. I am your attending oncologist. That means I'm responsible for your care, your treatment, your survival outcomes. What I am not is your confessor, your therapist, or your absolution. Do you understand? Ronald flinched. I'm sorry, he whispered. For everything. For not showing up when you needed me. For being so focused on work I didn't see. Stop. Lawrence held up one hand. I don't need your apologies, Mr. Hudson. I needed them 16 years ago. Now, I need you to cooperate with treatment so we can get you into remission and you can return to your life. That's it. She stood, smoothing her white coat with hands that Ronald noticed finally. Desperately had a faint scar along her collarbone. Lymph node removal, probably. Surgical biopsy. The realization hit him like a truck. You had it too, he breathed. Lymphoma. You. Lawrence's jaw tightened, but she didn't confirm or deny. Your biopsy is scheduled tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., she said instead. Don't eat or drink after midnight. A nurse will go over pre-op instructions. Questions about your medical care? Do you hate me? Did you forgive me? Where did you go? Why didn't you let me find you? No, Ronald said quietly. Good. Lawrence moved toward the door, hand on the handle. Wait. Ronald's voice broke. Please, are you okay? Did you beat it? For the first time, something flickered across Lawrence's face. Pain, or memory, or the weight of every battle fought alone. I survived, she said finally. Focus on doing the same. The door closed with a soft, final click. Ronald sat in the empty room, hospital gown hanging off his shoulders, billion-dollar empire meaning nothing, and felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Powerless. For the first time in his life, he couldn't buy his way out, couldn't negotiate, couldn't delegate. His life was literally in the hands of the woman he'd abandoned when she needed him most. The woman who just looked at him with eyes that had learned to survive without him. And here was the cruelest irony. Lawrence had survived the same disease, now trying to kill him. She'd survived it alone, while pregnant. Without his support, she'd become everything he'd needed her to be, everything he'd been too blind to see. And now she was the only person who could save him. Ronald pressed his hands to his face, shoulders shaking with something that might have been laughter, or crying, or the sound a man makes when he finally understands what he lost. Karma, it turned out, had perfect timing, and she wore a white coat with his future in her hands. Now, before we go further, let me tell you something important. This story? It's about more than one woman and one man. It's about every time someone didn't show up when they should have. Every time work came before love. Every time we thought we had all the time in the world until we didn't. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever been the one left waiting, or the one who realized too late what mattered, do me a favor. Stories like this one. Stories about women who survived impossible things. About second chances that came when life forced us to slow down and pay attention. And trust me, what happens next with Ronald and Lawrence? You're going to want to be here for it. Now, let's talk about what Ronald didn't know yet. What he was about to discover that would change everything. The biopsy room was smaller than Ronald expected. Clinical white walls, equipment humming with mechanical indifference, a procedure table that looked more like an altar than medicine. Lawrence entered wearing surgical scrubs, hair covered, mask hanging around her neck. Behind her, a nurse prepared instruments on a sterile tray with quiet efficiency. "We'll be taking tissue samples from enlarged nodes in your neck and chest," Lawrence explained, voice steady and detached. "Local anesthetic, minimal discomfort, results in 48 hours. Ronald nodded, mouth too dry to speak. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. This was just a medical procedure. Routine. But his hands were shaking. Lawrence noticed. Of course she noticed. "It's normal to be nervous," she said, not unkindly. "Professional concern, nothing more. The anesthetic will help. You'll feel pressure, but no pain." She moved closer to position him on the table, and that's when Ronald saw it clearly, the scar along her collarbone. Faint but unmistakable. About 2 inches long, slightly raised, the kind surgeons leave when digging for answers in lymph nodes. His breath caught. Lawrence followed his gaze, realized what he'd seen, and her jaw tightened imperceptibly. "When?" Ronald asked quietly. "When did you—" "Mr. Hudson," Lawrence stepped back, creating distance. "We need to focus on your procedure. You had the same thing. That scar, that's from a lymph node biopsy." Lawrence's eyes met his, and for one moment, the professional mask slipped. He saw exhaustion there. Old battles, survival earned through suffering he couldn't imagine. "Focus on surviving, Ronald," she said softly. "My own battle is over." The use of his first name, unexpected, unguarded, hit harder than any accusation. She'd fought this, alone, while he'd been building empires. The realization made him physically ill. "Lawrence, let's begin," she interrupted, nodding to the nurse. "Prep the site." The procedure took 40 minutes. Ronald lay still, while Lawrence worked with precise, practiced movements, injecting anesthetic, making small incisions, extracting tissue that would determine his future. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. But Ronald couldn't stop watching her face, searching for traces of the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes, who'd curl up beside him reading journals while he worked, who'd looked at him like he was more than his bank account. She was still in there somewhere, buried under years of hurt and survival and professional detachment. "All done," Lawrence announced, stepping back. The nurse applied bandages while Lawrence disposed of gloves with movements that spoke of routine. Ronald sat up slowly, touching the bandage on his neck. "Samples go to pathology," Lawrence explained, back to clinical mode. "Preliminary results tomorrow, full staging by Friday. Meanwhile, we'll schedule your PET scan and start baseline cardiac tests, since chemotherapy can affect—" "Were you scared?" Ronald interrupted. Lawrence froze, still holding his chart. "When you went through this," he continued, voice rough, "were you scared?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything never said. "Terrified," Lawrence finally admitted. "Every single day." "Did you have anyone with you? Family? Friends?" Lawrence's expression shuddered. "My mother helped when she could, but mostly, I did it alone." She met his eyes. You learn to be brave when there's no other option. The words landed like accusations she was too dignified to speak. I did it alone, because you weren't there. I learned to survive without you, because I had to. Ronald felt something crack in his chest that had nothing to do with lymphoma. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't. Stop. Lawrence held up one hand. Ronald, I appreciate that you feel guilty. I understand you want absolution. But I'm your doctor, not your priest. Save your energy for treatment. She moved toward the door, then paused, hand on the frame. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She left before he could respond. The next 72 hours were a blur of tests, scans, waiting. Ronald discovered quickly that being a patient was nothing like being a billionaire. Money couldn't make results come faster. Influence couldn't change pathology reports. His name meant nothing to cancer cells multiplying in his lymph nodes. Lawrence checked on him twice daily, morning rounds and evening follow-ups, maintaining perfect professional distance. She explained results, answered questions about protocols, adjusted medications when side effects appeared. But she never stayed longer than necessary, never let conversations drift personal, never gave him an opening to say the things keeping him awake at 3 a.m. Yet Ronald noticed things. The way her voice softened slightly when explaining scary concepts, making sure he understood without talking down. The way she'd pause after delivering concerning news, giving him time to process. The way she'd unconsciously touch her collarbone scar when discussing treatment, old trauma resurfacing, making her remember what he was about to face. She'd done this, survived this, while carrying his child. The guilt was suffocating. On day 3, pathology confirmed what everyone knew. Classical Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 2 IB. Treatable, survivable with aggressive chemotherapy. Lawrence delivered the news in her characteristic clinical style, but Ronald saw something flicker in her eyes when she said, survivable. Relief? Memory? The ghost of her own diagnosis? We'll start ABVD protocol next week, Lawrence explained. 4 drugs, 2-week cycles, minimum 6 months. Side effects include nausea, fatigue, hair loss, increased infection risk. You remember all of this, don't you? Ronald interrupted. Because you lived it. Lawrence's pen stopped moving. I remember, she said quietly. Was it as bad as they say? She looked at him, then really looked at him, and Ronald saw 16 years of battles in her eyes. Worse, Lawrence said honestly. But Ronald, you're starting from a better position than I did. Earlier stage. Better overall health. And you have something I didn't have. What's that? An oncologist who's already walked through hell and knows how to guide you out. It was the most personal thing she'd said since his admission. Ronald felt his throat tighten. Thank you for doing this, for treating me despite you abandoning me when I was dying. Lawrence's voice was sharp now. Despite you never trying hard enough to find me, despite the fact that seeing you in that bed every day reminds me of every moment I sat in one alone. The words hung between them, finally spoken after years of silence. Yes, Ronald whispered. Despite all of that. Lawrence closed his chart with a snap. I'm doing this because I took an oath, she said. Because no patient deserves to suffer, regardless of past mistakes. Because I'm a doctor first, and a woman with a grudge second. She stood to leave, then turned back. But Ronald, don't mistake professionalism for forgiveness. I'm saving your life because it's my job, not because you've earned it. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. Ronald spent the afternoon staring out his window, watching the city move below, people rushing to jobs, living lives, completely unaware their mortality was on loan until their bodies decided otherwise. His assistant had sent flowers, his board had sent a fruit basket. Investors had sent concerned emails about his timeline for return. None of it mattered. He'd spent 30 years building an empire, and 0 time building relationships that could survive crisis. The only person who'd ever truly loved him had learned to live without him. And now she was saving his life out of obligation, not affection. Around 4 p.m., Ronald decided to walk. The nurses had encouraged movement, helps circulation, prevents clots. So he shuffled down the oncology ward in his hospital gown and slippers, IV pole in tow. Feeling every one of his 53 years, he passed other patients' rooms, heard quiet conversations between families, saw loved ones holding hands, reading magazines together, simply being present. Everything he'd never been for Lawrence. He turned a corner and nearly collided with someone. "Sorry," Ronald muttered, stepping back. "Watch where you're going," a teenage voice responded, annoyed. Ronald looked up, and his world tilted. The boy was maybe 16, 17 tall, lean, wearing visitor credentials clipped to his hoodie. He carried a food tray from the cafeteria, clearly delivering lunch. But none of that registered. What registered was his face. Lawrence's bone structure. Her mouth. Her determined chin. But his eyes steel gray, intense, intelligent, were Ronald's own staring back from a face 16 years younger. The boy frowned. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ronald couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what he was seeing. The boy shrugged and moved past him down the hallway, knocking on a door marked, "Staff Lounge." "Mom? Brought you lunch. You forgot it again." "Mom." Ronald's legs gave out. He grabbed the wall for support, heart hammering, mind racing through impossible math that suddenly made perfect sense. 16 years ago, Lawrence left. This boy was roughly 16 years old. He had Ronald's eyes. And he just called Lawrence, Mom. Ronald stood frozen in the hallway, one hand gripping the wall, watching the staff lounge door where the boy had disappeared. His son. He had a son? The world tilted. Years of carefully constructed logic crumbling. Every business decision, every late night in the office, every merger prioritized over human connection. All of it suddenly looked different through the lens of a teenage boy with his eyes who'd grown up without him. Ronald's legs trembled. His IV pole rattled. A nurse approached, concern creasing her face. "Mr. Hudson, are you all right?" I need a moment." But he didn't take a moment. He moved toward the staff lounge like a man possessed, each step feeling simultaneously too fast and too slow. His hand shook as he raised it to knock, then stopped. What was he supposed to say? The door opened before he could decide. Lawrence stood there, sandwich halfway to her mouth, eyes widening when she saw him. Behind her, the boy Wilder, based on the name tag, looked up from his phone. "Mr. Hudson." Lawrence's voice was carefully neutral, but Ronald heard the tremor underneath. "Do you need something?" Ronald's eyes moved from her face to Wilder's and back. "Can we talk?" his voice cracked. "Privately?" Lawrence's jaw tightened. She glanced at Wilder, something unspoken passing between them, a look that spoke of Ronald would never be part of. "Wilder, honey, can you give us a minute?" The boy stood, shoving his phone in his pocket. As he passed Ronald in the doorway, their eyes met steel gray, on steel gray, and Ronald saw recognition there too. Not surprise. Just cold assessment. Wilder knew who he was. The realization hit like a physical blow. The door closed, leaving Ronald and Lawrence alone in the cramped lounge that smelled like burnt coffee and microwaved leftovers. Ronald couldn't finish? Lawrence set down her sandwich with deliberate care, hands steady even though her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. Yes. One word. No elaboration, no softening. Ronald's knees buckled. He grabbed a chair back for support. "How long have you known I was here?" Lawrence asked, voice tight. "How long were you planning to?" "I just saw him, 10 minutes ago. In the hallway. I swear, Lawrence, I had no idea." She studied his face, looking for lies, finding only truth. "You really didn't know," she said softly. Then, with more edge, "Of course you didn't. Because you never asked. You never tried hard enough to find me. You just moved on. That's not fair." "Fair?" Lawrence's voice rose, professional mask shattering. "You want to talk about fair, Ronald?" "I was 26, pregnant with your child, dying from cancer. And you were too busy closing a deal to take one phone call. One conversation. That's all I needed. You never told me you were pregnant. Because you made it crystal clear your life had no room for complications." Lawrence's hands shook, years of buried anger surfacing. "You canceled on me 3 times that week. 3 times. The last time I tried to tell you I needed to talk, you sent me a text saying you'd catch up after the merger. Well, guess what? I didn't wait. I left. And I fought for my life, and raised our son, and built a career. All while you were building your empire." The words hung between them, sharp as broken glass. "You should have told me," Ronald whispered. "Why?" Lawrence's laugh was bitter. So you could throw money at the problem? Hire a nanny? Show up for birthdays when your schedule allowed? You were too busy for a conversation. How could you possibly raise a child? Ronald had no answer. Because she was right. The man he'd been 16 years ago would have seen pregnancy as an inconvenience, cancer as someone else's problem, fatherhood as something to outsource. But I could change, Ronald said desperately. I could. It's 16 years too late for that. Lawrence moved toward the door. Conversation over. Wait. Ronald's voice stopped her. Please, let me talk to him. Let me at least. Absolutely not. He's my son. He's my son, Lawrence corrected, spinning around with fury in her eyes Ronald had never seen. I carried him through chemotherapy. I held him when he was premature and hooked to machines. I worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills you never knew existed. I was there for every nightmare, every fever, every moment of his life. You're a name on a birth certificate I never filed, and a Google search he did when he was old enough to ask questions. Each word landed like a punch. Does he know? Ronald asked quietly. Does he know I'm here? Lawrence's silence was answer enough. He knows who you are, Ronald. He's known for years, and he's made it very clear how he feels about the father who was never there. Ronald found Wilder in the hallway 20 minutes later, leaning against the nurse's station, scrolling through his phone with practiced indifference. Wilder? The boy looked up, expression neutral. Yeah? Ronald's throat closed. What do you say to the child you never knew you had? Can we talk? Wilder's jaw tightened exactly like Lawrence's when angry. About what? About Ronald gestured helplessly. About this, about me, about how you knocked up my mom then ghosted her when she needed you most? Wilder's voice was calm, matter of fact, which somehow made it worse. About how she fought cancer while pregnant, and you were in boardrooms? About how I grew up knowing my father was a billionaire who couldn't be bothered to show up? Each question was a knife. I didn't know, Ronald said desperately. I swear I didn't know about you. If I had. If you had. What? Wilder pushed off the wall, standing at full height. He was tall, almost Ronald's height, and the anger radiating from him was palpable. You would have sent child support, hired lawyers, shown up once a year with expensive gifts to ease your guilt? I would have been there. No, you wouldn't have. Wilder's laugh was cold, bitter beyond his years. Because you weren't there for my mom when she begged you to talk. You had more important things, and people like you don't change. You just get better at pretending. Ronald felt tears sting his eyes, actual tears, something he hadn't experienced in decades. You're right, he whispered. About all of it. I was selfish and ambitious and blind to anything that didn't serve my goals. I failed your mother in every possible way, and I can't change the past 16 years. But I'm here now, and I'm dying, Wilder finished. Yeah, I know, same thing my mom had. Except she didn't have a private room and expensive doctors and people bringing fruit baskets. She had Medicaid and charity care, and my grandmother's couch between shifts. The image cut Ronald to the bone. We had chemo bills, Wilder continued, voice rising. We had eviction notices. We had nights where mom worked until 2 a.m. and still came home to help me with homework, because she refused to let me see how scared she was. You had a mansion. You had more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. And we had nothing. Ronald's legs gave out. He sank onto a nearby chair, head in his hands. I'm sorry, he choked out. God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, well. Wilder's voice cracked slightly, teenage anger fracturing to reveal hurt underneath. Sorry doesn't pay medical bills. Sorry doesn't show up to parent-teacher conferences. Sorry doesn't hold your mom while she's throwing up from chemo. He turned to walk away, then stopped. You know what the worst part is? Wilder looked back, and Ronald saw wetness in those gray eyes, his eyes. Part of me always hoped you'd show up one day, that you'd have some amazing explanation. That you'd prove mom wrong about you being too selfish to care. A pause. But you're exactly who she said you were, and showing up now when you need something from her, that's just pathetic. Wilder walked away, shoulders rigid, leaving Ronald alone with the wreckage of every choice he'd ever made. The first chemotherapy session was scheduled for the next morning. Ronald lay awake all night, mind cycling through impossible thoughts. He had a son, a brilliant, angry, justified son who hated him. Lawrence had survived the same disease, now threatening his life while pregnant, alone, terrified. And he'd been 47 floors up, shaking hands, making deals, completely oblivious. When Lawrence came for morning rounds, she found him sitting on the edge of his bed, still in his hospital gown, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Ronald," her voice held professional concern, nothing more. "You should be resting." "He hates me," Ronald said hollowly. "Wilder. He hates me." Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. "He doesn't hate you," she said finally, sitting in the chair across from him, the first time she'd voluntarily stayed, without medical reason. "He hates that he wanted you." "That's different." Ronald looked up, and Lawrence saw devastation in his face that even cancer hadn't produced. "I missed everything," he whispered. His first word, his first steps, every birthday, every— "Yes," Lawrence interrupted gently. "You did." "Can I," Ronald's voice broke, "can I try to fix this? Not with money or grand gestures, but just, can I try to know him, even if he never forgives me?" Lawrence studied him, searching for manipulation, finding only raw honesty. "That's not up to me," she said. "It's up to Wilder. And Ronald, he's going to make you earn every minute, every conversation, every chance to prove you're different from who you were. I'll do whatever it takes. We'll see." Lawrence stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Your treatment starts in an hour. It's going to be rough. The first infusion is always the worst." Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You're going to need people, real people, not employees. Figure out who matters before it's too late." She left, but this time, Ronald noticed she didn't close the door quite as firmly. And in the staff lounge down the hall, Lawrence leaned against the wall, pressing her hand to her mouth, feeling the carefully constructed walls around her heart develop their first cracks in 16 years. The second round of chemotherapy hit Ronald harder than the first. Dr. Julie Martinez, Lawrence's colleague and senior oncology consultant, pulled up Ronald's latest PET scan on the monitor, with a frown that made Lawrence's stomach drop before she even saw the images. "Talk to me," Lawrence said, moving closer to study the glowing spots marking cancer's progression through Ronald's body. "The pre-treatment scan shows more extensive involvement than we initially assessed." Julie zoomed in on the chest cavity. "Look at the mediastinal involvement, and here," she pointed to the abdomen, "subdiaphragmatic nodes we didn't catch on the preliminary imaging. This changes staging." Lawrence felt her professional composure waver. "Stage 3? She asked quietly. "Advanced stage 3, possibly 3IB, with extranodal extension," Julie confirmed. "We caught it before it crossed into stage 4, but barely. Given the advanced staging, I'm recommending we start with escalated BEAOPP instead of standard ABVD. More intensive, worse side effects, but better outcomes for aggressive stage 3 disease." Lawrence stared at the scan, seeing not just her patient, but the man who'd once held her hand during thunderstorms, who'd memorized how she took her coffee, who'd promised everything and delivered nothing. The man who was the father of her child. The man who might be dying. "Does he know?" Julie asked gently. "Not yet." Lawrence's voice was barely audible. "I'll tell him this afternoon." Julie studied her friend's face with careful attention. "Lawrence," Julie said carefully, "are you okay?" "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You've been different since he was admitted." Julie touched Lawrence's shoulder. "And I know who he is. I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching." Lawrence's jaw tightened. "He's my patient. He's also your ex, and Wilder's father. And the man who broke your heart so thoroughly. You've spent 16 years making sure no one could get close enough to do it again." The truth landed like a punch. Lawrence turned away from the monitor, pressing her palms against the desk, head bowed. "I don't know what I'm feeling," she admitted. "I see him suffering and part of me thinks, good, now you know what it feels like. But another part," her voice cracked, "another part of me is terrified he's going to die before I figure out if I've forgiven him." "Are you angry at him?" Julie asked softly. "Or afraid of losing him again?" Lawrence had no answer. Ronald knew something was wrong the moment Lawrence walked into his room that afternoon. She carried his chart like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her shoulders were tense in a way he'd learned meant bad news. And she didn't meet his eyes when she sat down. "Your latest scans show progression," Lawrence said, clinical mask firmly in place. "The disease is more aggressive than we initially assessed. We need to change your treatment protocol to something more intensive." Ronald felt his chest tighten not from cancer, but from fear. How much more intensive? B-Cop regimen, stronger drugs, harsher side effects, longer infusions. Lawrence finally looked at him. Ronald, this is serious. Your lymphoma is advancing faster than typical presentation. We need to hit it harder, or, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Or, I'm going to die, Ronald finished quietly. Lawrence's professional mask cracked. Just for a moment, he saw raw emotion flash across her face. Fear, grief, something that might have been the ghost of old love. We're not there yet, she said, voice tight. But we need to be aggressive. Treatment starts tomorrow morning. Ronald nodded, trying to absorb information his brain didn't want to process. More chemo, worse side effects, higher stakes. He was running out of time. Lawrence, he started, then stopped, unsure how to voice the terror clawing at his throat. She waited, giving him space. I'm scared, Ronald admitted. Not just of dying before I can fix what I broke, before Wilder stops looking at me like I'm the villain, before you, he swallowed hard, before you know how sorry I am. Lawrence's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away furiously. Then fight, she said. Fight like your life depends on it. Because it does. She stood to leave, then paused. And Ronald, write it down. Everything you want to say. Because tomorrow is never guaranteed. Wilder had taken to visiting the hospital after school officially, to volunteer, unofficially, to check on his mother, who was working 12-hour shifts managing Ronald's care on top of her regular patient load. He found her in the staff lounge, forehead pressed against the table, untouched coffee growing cold beside her. Mom? Lawrence looked up, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. Hey baby, she tried to smile. How was school? Fine. Wilder sat across from her, studying her with perceptiveness of a kid who'd grown up watching his mother fight invisible battles. You look tired. Just a long day. Because of him? Lawrence didn't need to ask who him was. His cancer is progressing faster than expected, she said carefully. We're adjusting treatment. Wilder's expression flickered something too complicated to be satisfaction, too conflicted to be pure concern. Is he going to die? The question hung in the air, loaded with 16 years of absence and anger, and the possibility of losing a father he'd never really had. I don't know, Lawrence admitted. I'm going to do everything I can to save him. But Wilder, honey, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that I might lose him before I decide if I even want him. Wilder's laugh was bitter. Ironic, right? He had 16 years to show up. Now I might have 16 weeks. Lawrence reached across the table, squeezing her son's hand. You don't have to forgive him, she said gently. You don't have to feel anything you don't feel. But if there are things you need to say, anger, questions, anything, don't wait. Because time isn't promised. Wilder nodded, throat working. Did you ever stop loving him? He asked quietly. Lawrence froze, the question cutting deeper than her son probably realized. I don't know, she whispered. I stopped letting myself feel it. That's different than it disappearing. That night, after rounds were finished and the ward had settled into uneasy quiet, Ronald sat at the small table in his room with hospital stationery and a pen that kept running out of ink. He'd started the letter 4 times. Each attempt ended, crumpled in the trash. How do you compress 16 years of regret into words? How do you apologize for missing a lifetime in a few paragraphs? He started again. Wilder, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know what I failed to say when it mattered. When your mother and I were together, I was a different man. Worse, actually. Someone who measured worth in dollars and time and productivity. I thought love could wait while I built empires. I thought the people who mattered would simply wait. Your mother tried to tell me she needed me, I said later. She tried to reach me, and I chose a merger. I didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know she was sick. But here's the truth. Even if I had known, I'm not sure the man I was then would have shown up. That's not an excuse. It's just devastating truth. You grew up without a father because I was too selfish to be one. Your mother fought cancer alone because I was too blind to see her. She raised you into someone remarkable, while I built a company full of people who'll forget my name the day I die. I missed everything, and I can't get it back. All I can do is tell you this. I was wrong. About everything. About what matters. About who matters. Your mother is the strongest person I've ever known. You have her strength. I see it when you look at me with justified anger. When you stand up for her. When you refuse to let me off easy. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your time. I don't deserve to be called your father. But if I survive this, I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to become someone who might. Not with money, not with grand gestures, just by showing up, finally, impossibly, too late, but showing up. I'm sorry doesn't cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. Ronald. He folded the letter carefully, then put it in his bedside drawer. He couldn't give it to Wilder. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But at least he'd written it down. At least the truth existed somewhere besides his regrets. The emergency started at 2:47 a.m. Ronald woke to his heart racing uncontrollably, chest pain radiating down his left arm, breath coming in gasps that didn't fill his lungs. The room spun. His call button seemed miles away. He managed to press it before everything went dark. Alarms erupted through the oncology ward. Nurses flooded his room, checking vitals, calling codes. Someone yelling for the crash cart. Ronald floated in and out of consciousness, hearing fragments, tachycardia, possible cardiac event, get Dr. Carter, now. Lawrence arrived in pajama pants and a hospital sweatshirt, having been sleeping in the on-call room after a double shift. Her hair was disheveled, eyes wide with fear, that had nothing to do with professional concern. Ronald? She was at his bedside instantly, hands checking his pulse, eyes scanning monitors. Talk to me, what are you feeling? Can't breathe, Ronald gasped. Julie rushed in with imaging equipment. Could be tumor compression on the heart. We need an emergency echo. They worked around him with practiced efficiency, but Ronald saw something in Lawrence's face he hadn't seen before. Terror. Raw, unguarded terror that she might lose him. Not as a patient, as Ronald. Stay with me, Lawrence whispered, hand gripping his. You hear me? Stay with me. Ronald tried to hold on, but the darkness was pulling him under, and his last conscious thought was that he might die without ever giving Wilder that letter, without ever telling Lawrence she'd been right about everything, without ever learning what it meant to be the man they deserved. You know what's breaking my heart right now? It's not just Ronald facing his mortality. It's that so many of us wait until we're on our deathbeds to say what matters, to apologize, to show up. If you've ever wished you could go back and do things differently with your children, your partner, your family, you're not alone. And if this story is reminding you that time, tell me, who do you need to reach out to today? Who deserves to hear, I'm sorry, or I love you're feeling this story in your chest the way I felt it writing it? Because what happens next? This is where everything changes. The cardiac episode turned out to be tumor compression lymph nodes swelling around Ronald's heart, squeezing it like a fist. They'd stabilized him with emergency medication, adjusted his treatment plan, and scheduled intensified chemotherapy for that afternoon, despite his body's protests. We don't have time to wait, Lawrence had explained, exhaustion making her voice rough. The tumor growth is accelerating. We need to hit it now or risk complete cardiac involvement. Ronald had nodded, too weak to argue, too scared to do anything but trust her. The B-Cop infusion started at 2 p.m. in the chemo suite, a room Ronald had come to hate with its beeping machines and chemical smell and other patients fighting their own invisible wars. Lawrence monitored him personally, checking vitals every 15 minutes, adjusting drip rates, watching for reactions. How are you feeling? She asked after the first hour. Professional mask in place, but eyes betraying concern. Like poison is killing me from the inside out, Ronald said honestly. His skin felt too tight. His stomach churned. Every cell screamed that something was wrong. That's the chemo working. Lawrence squeezed his shoulder briefly, the most personal contact she'd allowed since his admission. Your body is fighting. That's good. But 90 minutes into the infusion, Ronald's body stopped fighting. It started surrendering instead. His vision blurred first. Then his hearing went muffled, sounds becoming distant. His heart rate spiked on the monitor 120, 140, 160 alarms, shrieking through the suite. Ronald tried to speak, to tell someone something was wrong, but his tongue wouldn't cooperate. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Lawrence's face above him, mouth moving in words he couldn't hear, hands on his chest, terror in her eyes that looked like love. Lawrence's shout for help brought nurses flooding in. "He's in VTACH," Julie yelled, reading the cardiac monitor. "Get the crash cart." Lawrence's hands worked automatically, checking airway, starting compressions, calling orders, but her mind was screaming. Not like this. Not when he's finally trying. Not when we haven't figured out what this is between us. Clear. Ronald's body jerked with the shock. The monitor flatlined, then beeped, then found rhythm again, weak, but present. "We've got him," Julie breathed. Sinus rhythm, blood pressure stabilizing. Lawrence nearly collapsed with relief. But the door burst open before she could process what had almost happened. Wilder stood in the doorway, school backpack still on his shoulders, face drained of color, eyes locked on his father's unconscious form. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "Is he?" "He's stable," Lawrence said quickly, moving toward her son. "Wilder, you shouldn't be." But Wilder wasn't listening. He dropped his backpack and moved to Ronald's bedside like someone in a trance, staring at the man who was technically his father but felt like a stranger. Ronald's face was gray, breathing labored, IV lines and monitor wires making him look more fragile than Wilder had ever seen him. This wasn't the billionaire from Forbes articles. This wasn't the man in expensive suits making power moves. This was just a sick man who looked terrified even in unconsciousness. "I thought," Wilder's voice broke completely. "I saw them running and I thought." He couldn't finish. Lawrence wrapped an arm around her son's shoulders, but Wilder shrugged it off gently, stepping closer to the bed. His hand hovered over Ronald's, not quite touching, trembling with emotion he'd spent 16 years refusing to feel. "I didn't want this," Wilder whispered. "I wanted to be angry at you forever. That was easier. But seeing you like this," Ronald's eyes fluttered open, unfocused, confused. "Wilder?" he rasped, barely audible. And something in Wilder's carefully constructed walls crumbled. "You're an idiot." Wilder choked out, tears streaming down his face now. "You know that? Showing up in my life when you're dying. That's the most selfish thing you could have done." Ronald's eyes filled. "I know. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing and just," Wilder's voice broke. "Just stay, okay? Stay with us. I don't want to lose you before I even get to know you." The words hung in the air, raw and honest, and everything neither of them knew how to say before this moment. Ronald lifted his hand, shaking. Weak and Wilder took it. Father and son, connected for the first time. "I'm so sorry," Ronald whispered, grip tightening, "for everything I missed, everything I wasn't. Let me be here now, please. Let me try." Wilder nodded, unable to speak, holding his father's hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to earth. Lawrence stood back, hand pressed to her mouth, watching the two most important men in her life finally find each other. Tears streamed down her face, years of anger and protection, and carefully maintained distance, dissolving in the face of something more powerful. Love. Complicated, messy, impossible love that had survived abandonment and cancer and 16 years of absence. Julie touched Lawrence's shoulder gently. "Come on, let's give them a minute." Lawrence nodded, wiping her eyes, following Julie out of the room but looking back once more. Wilder had pulled a chair close to the bed, still holding Ronald's hand, talking quietly about something Lawrence couldn't hear. Ronald was crying, nodding, trying to sit up despite his body's protests. And for the first time since Ronald Hudson had walked back into her life, Lawrence didn't see the man who'd abandoned her. She saw the man who was trying desperately to change. The man who'd nearly died and used his first conscious breath to apologize to his son. The man who might actually mean it this time. The hours after the collapse were a blur of medical monitoring and careful observation. They moved Ronald back to his room, upgraded his cardiac monitoring, adjusted his medication regimen. The chemotherapy had been too much for his compromised system, but stopping treatment wasn't an option. They'd have to find a balance aggressive enough to fight the cancer, gentle enough not to kill him in the process. Wilder refused to leave. He sat in the chair beside Ronald's bed doing homework, occasionally looking up to make sure his father was still breathing, sometimes asking questions about Ronald's life that were equal parts curiosity and interrogation. "What was Mom like when you knew her?" Wilder asked. Around 7 p.m., calculus textbook forgotten in his lap. Ronald smiled weakly, the memory softening his exhausted features. "Brilliant. Determined. She'd fall asleep reading medical journals and I'd have to carry her to bed." He paused. "She made me believe I could be better than I was. I just wasn't ready to do the work. And now I'd give everything I built to get back one day with her. One day with you. Wilder studied his father's face, searching for lies, finding only truth. Mom says you're writing us a letter, Wilder said quietly. The nurses mentioned it. Ronald's eyes widened. I wasn't sure. Can I read it? Ronald's hand shook as he reached for the bedside drawer, pulling out the folded pages he'd written in the small hours of fear and regret. He handed them to Wilder, then looked away, unable to watch his son read the words that exposed every failure, every regret, every desperate hope. Wilder read in silence. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. You're right, Wilder said thickly. You don't deserve forgiveness. You definitely don't deserve to be called my father. Ronald's heart cracked. But, Wilder continued, voice steadier now, maybe you could earn the right to try. Not as a dad. Not yet. But as, I don't know, someone who shows up. Someone who's honest. Someone who doesn't disappear when things get hard. Hope flickered in Ronald's chest, fragile but real. I can do that, he whispered. I will do that. Wilder nodded, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his backpack. I'm going to hold you to it. Please do. Around 9 p.m., a nurse gently suggested Wilder head home to sleep. He was 16 and had school tomorrow, and the hospital wasn't a place for teenagers to spend the night. Wilder stood reluctantly, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I'll be back tomorrow, he told Ronald. After school. And you better still be here. I'm not going anywhere, Ronald promised. At the door, Wilder paused. Hey, Ronald. Yeah? Thanks for not dying today. Then he was gone, leaving Ronald alone with the weight of a second chance he didn't deserve, but would spend his life trying to earn. Lawrence returned at 11 p.m. after finishing her rounds and updating patient charts and avoiding Ronald's room because she didn't trust herself to maintain professional distance anymore. She found him awake, staring at the ceiling, monitors beeping steadily. You should be sleeping, she said softly, closing the door behind her. Can't sleep. Ronald turned his head to look at her. Too much to think about. Lawrence moved to the chair Wilder had vacated, sitting in the spot still warm from her son. He stayed with you for 6 hours, she said. I've never seen him care about anything that long except video games and avoiding homework. Ronald's smile was genuine, transforming his exhausted face. He's remarkable. You raised someone remarkable. We could have raised him together, Lawrence said quietly, if you'd shown up. The words weren't accusatory anymore, just sad, mourning the life they could have built. I know, Ronald whispered. I think about that every day. All the moments I missed because I was too blind to see what mattered. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy, with 16 years of parallel lives finally, impossibly, intersecting again. You scared me today, Lawrence admitted, voice barely audible. When your heart stopped, I wasn't just scared as your doctor, I was... She couldn't finish. Ronald reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined, and Lawrence felt 16 years of carefully maintained walls begin to crumble. I never stopped, Ronald said, loving you. Even when I didn't deserve to, even when I tried to convince myself I'd moved on, you were always there, the ghost of every choice I made wrong. Lawrence's tears fell freely now, dropping onto their joined hands. I don't know if I can do this again, she whispered. Trust you. Let you in. Risk Wilder getting hurt if you... I understand, Ronald said gently. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for the chance to show up, every day, however long I have. Lawrence looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the billionaire, not the man who'd abandoned her, but someone transformed by suffering into something real. Someone finally worth believing in. She squeezed his hand, and stayed. The box arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by mistake to Ronald's hospital room instead of staff storage. Package for Dr. Carter, the volunteer said, setting the battered cardboard box on the chair. Got mixed up with patient deliveries. Should I take it to her office? I'll make sure she gets it, Ronald said, still weak from yesterday's episode but sitting up for the first time in days. The volunteer left, and Ronald found himself staring at the box. It was taped shut, labeled in faded marker. L. Carter, Personal, Storage Unit, 47. He should call a nurse, have them take it away. Respect Lawrence's privacy. But the tape had already torn on one corner during transport, and through the gap, Ronald saw the edge of a spiral notebook, the kind medical students carried, covered in handwritten notes. His hand moved, before his conscience could stop it. Inside were journals, 5 of them, spanning different years, pages dog-eared and stained, covered in Lawrence's precise handwriting. Beneath them, a hospital bracelet, Mount Sinai, oncology ward with Lawrence's name and a date from 16 years ago. Ronald's hands trembled as he lifted the first journal. The cover was decorated with pressed flowers, delicate and faded. Inside, the first entry was dated 3 days after Lawrence left his mansion. October 14th. Dr. Chen confirmed it today. Stage 2. Hodgkin's lymphoma. I keep saying the words out loud, trying to make them real. Lymphoma. Cancer. Dying. I'm 12 weeks pregnant with Ronald's baby. I haven't told anyone except Mom. Can't tell him. Won't tell him. What would I even say? Remember that conversation you were too busy for? Surprise, I'm pregnant and dying. I'm so scared I can't breathe. Not just of the cancer, of doing this alone, of my baby growing inside a body trying to kill itself, of dying before I hold him. But I left the mansion and I can't go back. Ronald chose his empire. I have to choose survival. Ronald's vision blurred. He turned the page with shaking hands. October 19th. First chemo session today. They warned me it would be bad. They didn't warn me it would feel like dying from the inside out. I threw up 14 times. Mom held my hair and cried when she thought I couldn't see. The baby is still there. Still growing. Heart beating on the ultrasound like a tiny war drum. I whispered to him, "We're going to fight this together, little one. You and me." I wonder if Ronald ever thinks about me. Then I remember he probably doesn't even know I'm gone. I hate him for that, but I hate myself more for still loving him. Ronald made a sound half sob, half gasp, and kept reading. The journals chronicled everything. The agony of chemotherapy during pregnancy. The terror of premature labor at 34 weeks. Holding Wilder for the first time in the NICU while still recovering, not knowing if she'd live to see him come home. April 3rd. They let me hold him today. 4 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect. He has his father's eyes, that steel gray, that used to make my heart stop. Now, it just breaks it all over again. I named him Wilder James Carter. Wilder, because he's fighting against impossible odds. James, after my father, who taught me that real strength is showing up. Ronald doesn't know his son exists. Doesn't know I survived. Doesn't know I did it alone while he built his empire. Part of me still hopes he'll find out. Show up. Prove me wrong. But hope is dangerous when you're this broken. The entries continued through Wilder's first year. Lawrence working night shifts, studying for boards while exhausted, celebrating milestones alone. November 12th. Wilder took his first steps today. Walked right into my arms, laughing. I cried for an hour after he fell asleep. Not sad tears. Happy sad tears. The kind you cry when something beautiful happens in some boardroom making decisions that affect thousands. He doesn't know he has a son who just learned to walk, who has his smile, who deserves better. But we're alive, both of us, against every odd. That has to be enough. Ronald read about Wilder's 4th birthday party, just Lawrence, Margaret, and 2 neighborhood kids. First day of kindergarten. Wilder asking, "Where's my daddy?" And Lawrence's heart breaking while she explained. The final journal ended 3 years ago, when Wilder turned 13. March 7th. Wilder asked me today if I ever loved his father. I told him yes, more than I'd loved anyone. He asked if I still do. How do you explain that love doesn't disappear because someone fails you, that you can hate someone and still carry them in your heart like an old scar? I told him, love is complicated, and your father is someone I'll always care about, even though he wasn't capable of being what we needed. Wilder said, maybe he wasn't capable then. People change. My wise boy, still hoping for happy endings. I didn't tell him I've spent 13 years waiting for Ronald to find us, to show up. I didn't tell him I never stopped loving his father. Some truths are too heavy for children to carry. Ronald's chest heaved with sobs he couldn't control. He'd missed everything, every moment of fear, every milestone, every time Lawrence needed him, and he wasn't there. The door opened. Lawrence stopped dead when she saw him holding her journal, tears streaming down his face, looking like his soul had shattered. What are you? Her eyes dropped to the box, the journals, and her face went white. Those are private. I know. Ronald's voice was destroyed. They were delivered here by mistake. I should have called someone. I shouldn't have. He couldn't finish. Lawrence moved forward, snatching the journal from his lap, but her hands were shaking. You had no right, she said, voice tight with fury and something deeper. No right to read about the worst moments of my life like there. You almost died. Ronald interrupted, looking up at her with devastation in his eyes. You almost died giving birth to our son. Alone, in a charity hospital, while I was celebrating a merger. Lawrence's anger crumbled into something raw. Yes, she whispered. I almost died, and you weren't there. Why didn't you tell me you were dying? Ronald's question came out broken, desperate. Why didn't you make me listen? Lawrence's laugh was bitter. Because you made it clear, your life had no room for mine. She threw the journal onto the bed, years of buried rage erupting. You canceled on me 3 times that week. The last time I tried to talk, you sent me a text. I didn't have time to wait for your merger. I had cancer and a baby, and zero indication you would choose me over your empire. I would have. No, you wouldn't have. Lawrence's voice rose. The man you were then? He would have thrown money at the problem. Hired help. Showed up when convenient. I didn't need convenient. I needed you. Ronald stood weak, trembling, still hooked to IVs, and dropped to his knees in front of her. Lawrence gasped. Ronald, don't, you shouldn't be. I was a coward, Ronald said, looking up at her from the floor, completely vulnerable. I was selfish and blind, and so obsessed with building something that would last, that I destroyed the only thing that actually mattered. You, Wilder, us. Tears streamed down his face. I can't change the past 16 years. I can't give you back the moments I should have been there for. I can't undo the pain. But Lawrence, his voice cracked completely. Let me spend whatever time I have left making it right. Not with money, just by showing up. Finally. Desperately. Too late, but showing up anyway. Lawrence's knees gave out. She sank down to the floor with him, both of them kneeling in a hospital room, years of hurt and love and regret finally colliding. I never wanted you to see me broken, Lawrence whispered, tears falling freely. That's why I left. That's why I didn't tell you. I couldn't bear you looking at me with pity. Ronald reached for her hands, and this time she let him take them. You were never broken, he said fiercely. You were the strongest person I've ever known. You survived what I'm fighting now, while carrying our child. You built a life, raised our son, all while I was too blind to see what I'd lost. I was terrified every day, Lawrence admitted. Of dying. Of Wilder growing up without either parent. Of never getting to tell you I loved you more than breathing. Loved? Ronald's voice was barely audible. Past tense? Lawrence looked at him, really looked at him, and saw, not the billionaire, or the patient, or the man who'd abandoned her, but Ronald. Just Ronald. Flawed and human, and finally, impossibly, present. I never stopped, she whispered. Even when I hated you. Even when I tried to convince myself you didn't matter. I never stopped loving you. Ronald pulled her close, and Lawrence didn't resist. They held each other on the hospital floor, broken, scarred, impossibly alive, and let 16 years of pain finally transform into something that might become healing. Can I tell you something? This moment right here, this is what forgiveness looks like. Not perfect, not easy, not erasing the past. Just 2 broken people choosing to believe that yesterday's failures don't have to define tomorrow's possibilities. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone carrying old hurts, someone who thinks it's too late for second chances, someone who's forgotten that love can survive, even the worst betrayals, send it to a friend. Post it where someone who needs hope might find it. Because this story? It's not just about Ronald and Lawrence. It's about all of us trying to figure out if broken things can be made whole again. Now let me show you what happened next. Because their story isn't over yet. 2 days later, Ronald's latest scans came back. Julie pulled them up with cautious optimism on her face. The tumor response is better than expected, she told Lawrence and Ronald together. The aggressive protocol is working. Lymph nodes are shrinking. If this continues, we're looking at significant remission potential. Ronald closed his eyes, exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks. Hope. Real. Fragile. Terrifying hope. Lawrence squeezed his hand, and for the first time since he'd been admitted, she smiled at him without walls between them. "You're going to survive this," she said softly. "And then we're going to figure out what comes next. All three of us." Ronald brought her hand to his lips. "I'm ready," he whispered. "Finally. For whatever comes next." 6 months changes everything. Ronald sat in the exam room where this journey had begun, waiting for the scan results that would determine his future. His hair had grown back thinner, grayer. But there, the weight he'd lost was slowly returning. The exhaustion that had defined early treatment had faded into something manageable. But the real change wasn't physical. It was the way Wilder's name appeared in his phone, now with regular texts, baseball game updates, questions about homework, occasional, "You still alive?" check-ins that made Ronald smile every time. It was the way Lawrence looked at him now, not with professional detachment, but with something cautious and tender and real. It was the way he'd learned to measure worth, not in stock prices, but in moments. Coffee with his son. Lawrence's hand in his, during late-night conversations. Being present for the small, ordinary, sacred things he'd missed for 53 years. The door opened. Lawrence walked in with Julie, both wearing expressions Ronald had learned to read. Cautious optimism. "Your PET scan is clear," Lawrence said, and her voice broke slightly on the word clear. "No active disease. Complete metabolic response." Ronald's breath caught. "I'm in remission," Julie confirmed, smiling. "Early remission, which means continued monitoring. But Ronald, you did it. You beat it." The words didn't feel real. "How long until we know it's really gone?" he asked. "We'll scan every 3 months for the first year," Lawrence explained, professional mask slipping to reveal pure relief. "Then every 6 months, 5-year survival rates for your presentation are excellent, especially with your response." She sat down across from him, and Ronald saw tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," Ronald said quietly. "Twice." Lawrence's brow furrowed. "Twice? Once as my doctor, once as," he swallowed hard, "as the reason I wanted to survive. Because dying before I could fix what I broke would have been the cruelest ending." Julie cleared her throat. "I'll give you 2 a moment. Congratulations, Ronald. You earned this." The door closed, leaving them alone. Lawrence sat in silence for a long moment, then spoke. "When you were first admitted, I told myself I could treat you clinically, keep my distance, save your life and send you back to your empire without getting my heart involved." She looked up, eyes wet. "I was lying to myself." Ronald waited, hardly breathing. "The moment your heart stopped during that first collapse," Lawrence continued, voice shaking, "I realized I was going to lose you before I figured out if I'd forgiven you. And that terrified me more than anything has since my own diagnosis." "Lawrence, let me finish." She held up a hand. "You hurt me, deeply. For years, I used that hurt as armor, told myself I was better off without you. Raised Wilder to believe his father was incapable of change." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But watching you these past 6 months, seeing you show up for treatment even when you could barely stand, seeing you fight for a relationship with Wilder even when he pushed you away, seeing you become the man I always hoped you could be." Her voice broke. "I was wrong. People can change. You did." Ronald moved to kneel in front of her, careful of his still healing body. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve you or Wilder or this second chance. But Lawrence, I'm asking anyway. Not for the past back, we can't get that, but for a future. Together. However, you'll let me have it." Lawrence touched his face, thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. "Even when I should have. Even when it would have been easier." "Is that a yes?" "It's a, let's take this slow, and see if what we had can become something even better." Ronald smiled, genuine, unguarded. The smile of a man who'd lost everything and found something more valuable. "I can do slow." He leaned forward, and Lawrence met him halfway, their kiss tentative and sweet, and full of 16 years of what-ifs, finally becoming what is. Outside the exam room, Wilder had been waiting. He'd heard everything through the door he'd accidentally left cracked. When his parents emerged minutes later, hands intertwined, faces soft with emotion, Wilder felt something shift in his chest. Hope. Real, terrifying, possible hope. "So," Wilder said, trying to sound casual and failing. "Remission, huh?" Ronald grinned. "Complete response." "That's," Wilder's voice cracked. "That's really good." Lawrence pulled her son into a hug, and after a moment's hesitation, Ronald joined them, the three of them standing in the hospital hallway, imperfect and healing and finally whole. Maybe we all get second chances, Wilder whispered. The baseball game was Wilder's idea. You've never seen me play, he'd said, trying to sound nonchalant but looking at Ronald with something like hope. Coach says I've got scholarship potential. Ronald had cleared his entire calendar. The high school field was nothing like the luxury boxes Ronald used to attend. Metal bleachers that burned in the sun. Concession stand selling stale popcorn. Parents cheering too loud, coaches yelling instructions, teenagers trying too hard to look like they didn't care. It was perfect. Ronald sat beside Lawrence in the third row, their shoulders touching, watching Wilder warm up on the pitcher's mound. The boy had his father's focus, his mother's determination, his own particular grace. He's nervous, Lawrence said softly. He'll never admit it, but he wants you to see him do well. He's incredible, Ronald breathed. The first pitch was a strike, clean, fast, confident. Ronald was on his feet before he realized it, cheering. Wilder glanced toward the stands, caught his father's eye, and smiled small but genuine before turning back. Lawrence leaned into Ronald's shoulder. This is what you missed, she said. Not the big moments, the ordinary ones. Weekend games and homework struggles, and all the small sacred things that make a life. I know, Ronald took her hand. I can't get those years back, but I'm here now, for every game, every moment, every ordinary sacred thing from this point forward. The game ended with Wilder's team winning. As parents filed out, Wilder jogged over to where Ronald and Lawrence waited. So, Wilder asked, trying to sound casual. What'd you think? I think, Ronald said carefully, that I just watched the most talented pitcher in the state. And I'm furious at myself for missing every game before this one. Wilder's grin was pure sunshine. There's a season next year, and college after that. Plenty of games left. I'll be at every single one, Ronald promised. And for the first time in his life, he meant it. You know what gets me about this story? It's not just that Ronald got his second chance. It's that Lawrence was brave enough to give it to him. Because here's the truth. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's not letting someone off the hook. It's choosing not to let old pain steal your future happiness. If this story moved you, if you're crying or smiling or thinking about your own tell me about the person who came back, or the person you're hoping will, or the forgiveness you're still learning to give. Stories like this waiting for you. Stories about women who survived impossible things, about love that refused to die, about families that found their way back to each other when it mattered most. Now, let me show you how their story ends, or maybe, how it really begins. That night, Ronald drafted the letter he'd been avoiding for weeks. To the Board of Directors, Hudson Innovations. Effective immediately, I am taking a 6-month leave of absence to focus on my health and family. For 30 years, I built this company believing success was wrong. Success is measured in moments, in relationships, in being present for the people who matter when they need you most. I missed that lesson until cancer forced me to learn it. During my absence, I trust the leadership team to continue our mission. But I'm also proposing significant changes to company culture, mandatory family leave policies, flexible schedules, mental health support. Because no one should choose between career and family the way I did. No one should wake up at 53 and realize they've built an empire, but destroyed what actually matters. I don't know what the future holds. I'm in remission, but cancer taught me tomorrow is never guaranteed. What I do know, I'm choosing differently now. Presence over productivity. Love over legacy. Family over fortune. I hope you'll support this decision. But even if you don't, I'm taking this leave. Because I've spent 30 years being the CEO you needed. It's time to be the father and partner my family deserves. Respectfully, Ronald Hudson. He read it twice, then hit send before courage could fail him. His phone buzzed minutes later, his assistant, confused and concerned. Ronald turned it off. Some conversations could wait. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in early spring, the three of them stood outside St. Augustine Medical Center for the last time. Ronald's final scan had come back clear. No treatment scheduled. No follow-up appointments for another 3 months. Just life ordinary, precious, uncertain life. How does it feel? Lawrence asked, squeezing his hand. Terrifying, Ronald admitted. I've spent 6 months with cancer as the center of my world. Now I have to figure out who I am without it. You're a survivor, Wilder said. Same as Mom. That's pretty badass. Lawrence laughed, and the sound was lighter than Ronald had heard in months. They walked toward the parking lot together, Lawrence in the middle, hands held by both her son, and slowly, carefully, the man she was learning to love again. So what now? Wilder asked. What do recovering billionaires do with their time? Ronald pretended to think. Well, I promised to attend every one of your baseball games. That's 17 this season. And your mom mentioned something about finally taking a real vacation? Hawaii, Lawrence confirmed. Somewhere with no hospitals and no cell service. And maybe Ronald hesitated, looking at Lawrence. Maybe we look at houses? Something with enough space for all of us. If that's something you'd want. Lawrence stopped walking. Wilder stopped too, watching his parents with careful attention. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Lawrence said quietly. I'm asking if you'll let me be part of your lives. Really part of it. Not a visitor or a reformed villain trying to earn redemption. Just family. Lawrence looked at Wilder, a silent question passing between mother and son. Wilder shrugged, but his eyes were wet. I mean, we've already got his eyes, and his terrible sense of humor, Wilder said. Might as well make it official. Lawrence turned back to Ronald, and he saw everything in her face. The scared 26-year-old, who'd left his mansion alone. The fierce mother, who'd fought cancer and raised their son. The woman who'd somehow found space in her scarred heart to love him again. Yes, Lawrence whispered. Let's be a family. Ronald pulled them both close, his son, his love, his second chance at getting life right, and felt something settle in his chest that had been missing for 16 years. Peace. They stood in the parking lot for a long moment. Three people who'd survived impossible things. Holding. Continuing and completing the script. They stood in the parking lot for a long moment. Three people who'd survived impossible things, holding each other against an uncertain future. Then Wilder broke the moment with perfect teenage timing. Okay, this is getting sappy. Can we get breakfast? I'm starving. Lawrence laughed. Ronald grinned. And together, imperfect, healing, impossibly whole, they walked toward the car, and whatever came next. The hospital doors closed behind them. A new beginning waited ahead. And for the first time in 30 years, Ronald Hudson knew exactly where he wanted to be. Right here. With them. Home. Epilogue. 1 year later. The house wasn't a mansion. It was a 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester, with a backyard big enough for a dog, a kitchen that actually got used, and a front porch where Lawrence liked to drink her morning coffee while watching the neighborhood wake up. Ronald had sold the penthouse 6 months ago, donated most of the proceeds to cancer research and patient assistance programs, kept enough to buy this house, their house, and fund Wilder's college education without the scholarships he'd earned but didn't technically need anymore. He'd gone back to Hudson Innovations part-time after his leave ended, but he'd meant what he'd written in that letter. The company now had the most generous family leave policy in the industry. Flexible schedules. Mental health support. Ronald had built an empire. Now he was trying to make sure it didn't destroy the people who worked for it the way ambition had nearly destroyed him. On this particular Saturday morning, Ronald stood in the kitchen, making pancakes, something he'd learned to do in the past year, along with grocery shopping, attending parent-teacher conferences, and showing up. Just showing up. Lawrence appeared in the doorway, hair still messy from sleep, wearing one of his old t-shirts and a smile that made his heart stop the way it had 18 years ago when they first met. You're up early, she said, moving into his arms like she belonged there. Because she did. Couldn't sleep, Ronald admitted, kissing the top of her head. Too excited. Today was the day. The one they'd been planning for 3 months. Wilder's high school graduation. Their son, brilliant, kind, headed to MIT on a full academic scholarship despite Ronald's offers to pay, would walk across that stage and into a future neither of his parents could have imagined when Lawrence left that mansion 16 years ago. Is he nervous? Ronald asked. Pretending not to be, Lawrence said. But I heard him practicing his valedictorian speech at 2 a.m. Ronald smiled. Wilder had inherited his mother's intelligence and determination, his father's intensity and focus, but he'd become someone entirely his own, someone who'd learned from both their failures and their redemptions. Someone who knew that showing up mattered more than anything else. Footsteps on the stairs announced Wilder's arrival. Please tell me those are chocolate chip pancakes, Wilder said. sliding into a kitchen chair with the casual ease of a kid who'd finally learned what home felt like. "Obviously," Ronald said, flipping one expertly. "It's your graduation day. You get whatever you want. Then, I want you both to stop crying during my speech." Lawrence laughed, wiping her eyes preemptively. No promises. They ate breakfast together, the three of them, plus Lawrence's mother Margaret, who'd moved into the guest room last month and spent her days spoiling her grandson and occasionally reminding Ronald that he'd been an idiot but she supposed he'd learned. After dishes were cleared and everyone scattered to get ready, Ronald found himself alone in the living room, looking at the photos Lawrence had finally felt safe enough to display. Wilder as a newborn in the NICU, tiny and fighting. Lawrence in her white coat on her first day as an attending oncologist. The three of them at Wilder's first baseball game that Ronald had attended, all of them caught mid-laugh. And a new one, from last month, Ronald, Lawrence, and Wilder. At the small courthouse ceremony, where Ronald had officially adopted the son who'd been his all along, making legal what had become true in their hearts. Ronald's phone buzzed. A text from Wilder. "Hey, thanks for being here. For all of it. Love you, Dad." Ronald's vision blurred. He typed back. "Love you too, son. Proudest moment of my life will be watching you walk across that stage. Well, second proudest. First was when you called me Dad." Three dots appeared, then, "Okay, now you're making me cry and I have to give a speech in 3 hours. Stop being emotional." Ronald laughed, pocketing his phone. Lawrence appeared beside him, beautiful in a blue dress, hair done, makeup perfect. "You ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For our son to graduate, valedictorian. For him to leave for MIT in 3 months. For the house to be quieter than we're used to." Ronald pulled her close. "As long as I'm with you, I'm ready for anything." Lawrence looked up at him, and he saw everything in her eyes. The past they'd survived, the present they'd built, the future they were still writing together. "I love you," she said. "I need you to know that. Really know it. Not as forgiveness, or obligation, or second chances. Just, I love you. The man you are now. The man you're still becoming." "I love you too," Ronald whispered. "More than I knew how to love anything 16 years ago. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." They kissed. Soft and sweet and full of promises they'd spent the past year learning how to keep. Wilder's voice called from upstairs. "Are we doing this, or are you two making out in the living room again?" They broke apart, laughing. "Both," Lawrence called back. "We're multitasking." And as they gathered their things and headed out to watch their son graduate, their brilliant, remarkable, loved son Ronald felt something he'd spent 53 years chasing through boardrooms and mergers and billion-dollar deals. Contentment. Not perfection. Not the absence of regret. Just the deep, bone-certain knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly who he was supposed to be with, doing exactly what mattered most. Showing up. Finally. For all of it. And that's where their story ends. Or maybe where it really begins. Because here's what I want you to understand. This wasn't just a story about a billionaire who got cancer and learned what mattered. This was a story about all of us, everyone who's ever put work before family, everyone who's ever realized too late what they were missing, everyone who's ever wondered if broken things can be made whole again. The answer is yes. But only if you're willing to do the work. If this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in Ronald or Lawrence or Wilder, I need you to do 3 things, right? Because there are more stories like this waiting for you. Stories about second chances and fierce women and love that refuses to die. And you deserve to hear all of it. Did this story make you feel? Who do you need to show up for today? What second chance are you still hoping for? Who needs to hear it? That friend who's estranged from their kids. That sister who's carrying old hurts. That parent who thinks it's too late to make things right. Send it to them. Because sometimes we need to see someone else's redemption before we can believe in our own. Ronald and Lawrence's story reminds us that it's never too late to choose differently, to show up, to love the people who matter before time runs out. Don't wait for cancer to teach you that lesson. Don't wait for loss to show you what you had. Show up today, right now, for the people who need you. Because tomorrow isn't promised to any of us. But today is still yours. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for caring about Lawrence and Ronald and Wilder. Thank you for believing that broken people can heal, and broken families can be restored, and broken hearts can learn to love again. Now go. Call someone. Text someone. Show up for someone.